Welcome back to the vlog 19. Welcome back to social studies. Welcome back to headquarters. I'm in headquarters again because it's been raining outside. So much rain, I tell you. So last vlog we talked about how Indiana became a state and how it started to grow and some of the positive impacts of the state growing, a better economy and trade. Some of the negatives as we pushed out Native Americans unfairly and forced them to move. So now we're going to skip ahead. That was like in the 1820s, and we're gonna skip ahead to probably around like the 1840s to 1850s. We're gonna start talking about what starts to happen then. So we're gonna slowly lead up to this thing called the Civil War, and a lot of you guys have a pretty good idea what the Civil War is. So we're just gonna talk about what led up to it, some of the big overall big picture, and then in the next vlog we'll talk about how Indiana was directly involved. So today's kind of a big overall picture of the whole country. So I want to read this first. So as you learned, Indiana became a state in 1816. At this time, difficult issues were dividing the country. Kind of sounds like today. Many people in North had different beliefs about the people in the South. And the most important difference was about slavery. So the North was kind of against the South. And the South was against the North, however you want to look at it. These differences grew into a major conflict. So Indiana, like we said earlier, the Constitution said that they were a free state, which meant that it did not allow slavery. Other states located in the South were called slave states. Some of those would be like Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, North Carolina. They did allow people to own other people. Sounds terrible, but that was the thing that they did. So the North was against this, and there was a bunch of people called abolitionists. That's a really big fancy word, and that just means they were people who wanted to end slavery or didn't want to see it spread or try to contain it if they could. And the Southerners disagreed with abolitionists. They wanted enslaved workers to work in the fields for them. They've been using slaves for a long time, and it was pretty good for the slave owners, but no one else. So shortly after Indiana became a state, 1820, Congress passed the Missouri Compromise. And it drew an imaginary line and said, North and South above it, free states below it, were going to be states where you could own slaves. So right after it was signed, there was 12 states that were free and 12 that were slave states. And this was balanced, but as the country grew, it started to become out of balance. And it started to lead to conflict. And abolitionists, again, wanted them to be free. They started doing things to help free the slaves. A lot of you guys have heard about the Underground Railroad, which, if you remember right, isn't an actual railroad. It just was kind of talking about like this path, and they called it underground because it was a secret. And there was this secret paths to help slaves get to freedom. And through this path, a lot of the slaves would go up through even Indiana, up into Canada to be free for the rest of their life. And they think between 40 and 100,000 people used the system to gain their freedom. It doesn't sound like a lot in today's numbers, but remember, a state only had to have 60,000 people to become a state. So an entire state used the Underground Railroad to become free. And so that was a major part, and there was a lot of places in Indiana that were used for the Underground Railroad. I think even including in Bloomington, there's a couple houses that were used to hide slaves as they traveled north for their freedom. We're going to fast forward again a couple more years. Now we're going up to 1860. Abraham Lincoln, Honest Abe, was elected president. And he was a part of a new party called the Republicans, and they were against slavery. The southern states argued for what they called states' rights, or the idea that the states had the power to choose what they wanted to do. And that was mostly that they wanted to decide that they could have slavery, because there was a big push to start to outlaw slavery across the whole nation. So Southerners viewed Lincoln's election as a threat to slavery and states' rights, mostly slavery. And so they began to secede. That's a really fancy word. It just means to separate from the United States. Like they were part of the United States as a state, and then they left. And they formed a Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy. So recall that a Confederate from the very beginning, like we had the United States itself, is just a loose organization of states. They didn't have a strong federal government like we do now. So Abraham Lincoln said, no, you can't just decide to leave if you want. And he said that these states were still part of the United States. He's like, you can't just decide that you want to leave. But this even made the southern states even more mad. And on April 12th, 1861, not long after he was sworn in, Confederates fired shots on Fort Sumter. So this was the first battle in what would become the Civil War. And again, the Civil War is a war that a country has with itself. So you'll hear that all around the world. It's like a country might be fighting with itself. Usually it's one group of people in the government fight against a different people in the government. And these things, no one wins, especially when these things could be debated about and talked about, and done in a much more civil manner than starting a war. And so the United States Civil War happened to be the North free states versus the Southern slave states. And so the war began, and it began in Fort Sumter. And I'm going to leave it there. We're going to talk about the end of the war and how Indiana was involved in the next vlog. But this is a pretty general overview of the Civil War. I'm going to have you answer a few questions in a quiz today, and I will see you in the next vlog. Have a good day. Bye!